Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Where we come together each Tuesday, whether in person here at Spirit and Truth Sanctuary, or if you're joining us online, to connect with each other. We will begin today by opening our hearts and preparing our minds for the daily devotion as we say together our prayer of surrender. Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. Take from me what you will. Awaken in me what you will. The Christ man is around me. The Christ mind is in me. The Christ power flows through me. And the Christ mystery exists as me. I believe it. I perceive it. And now I receive it. I am surrendered. Amen. And so it is. All right, so today's devotion is called Set 'em Up, Knock 'em Down, which might remind you of bowling, setting up the pins and knocking them down, but it's about becoming immune, as it were, to both the flattery and the criticism of others and not allowing either to affect you negatively. Let's read the affirmation together. Today, I am aware that I am not what people say about me, good or bad. I am neither the flattery nor the criticism of others. I am what I say about me. I am the thoughts I have about myself. Amen. The text of the devotion begins by pointing out the fact that it was the same crowd of people who celebrated Jesus's triumphal entry into Jerusalem by laying down their own coats and palm branches in the street for the donkey he was riding on to walk on, all the while shouting, Hosanna, in the highest, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. It was that same crowd who only several days later was demanding his blood and crying out, crucify him. And then the text describes this as the pinnacle of flattery and the pitfall of criticism. And it asks the question, how do we avoid both of these? Of course, no one enjoys being criticized, but it can be constructive. Criticism sometimes can be constructive. On the other hand, everyone likes being flattered, but flattery can be purposely deceptive and manipulative depending on the motive of the flatterer. The goal is, as in most things, to hit the middle. We don't want to fall into a pit and be buried by others' criticism, but neither do we want to be put on a pedestal by their flattery, because as we know, those are both unsustainable extremes, and we can be knocked off that pedestal as easily as we were put up on it. Let me read that last paragraph so we can have a better understanding. It says, flatterers focus only on the good, and critics are never satisfied. So we see right here, there's no balance to either of those. We may never be rid of either, yet what we can do is rid ourselves of our need for them. When you know who you are, both flattery and criticism become non-issues. Receive flattery with a grain of salt. Consider the criticism and decide if there's any application of it that might be helpful. Assume the best intention from flatterers while remaining vigilant to manipulation. In other words, assume that the person giving you the compliment is being genuine and doesn't have ulterior or manipulative motives, but learn to wear all flattery as a loose garment. Don't become dependent on the praise or the approval or the validation of others. Enjoy it, but don't let it become necessary. On the other hand, assimilate the negative from your critics without becoming beaten down by people who are just being mean-spirited. Or, as we've said before, learn to use everything to your own advantage and for your own growth. Even if they meant for it to be harmful, if you find a little grain of truth in what they're saying, use it to better yourself. Then the joke's on them because you still came out on top. Sometimes your critics can be helpful by pointing things out that you can't see. Maybe it was a blind spot to you and they saw it and they pointed out to you and they meant to hurt you, but you thought, you know how my brother always says, devil, get behind me and push? It's that same concept of, okay, criticize me. If it doesn't fit, I'm going to throw it away. But if there's something to it, I'm going to make a change. All right, so that's great advice. Let's end the devotion by reading the prayer together. One voice, awaken in me the wisdom to wear flattery and criticism like a loose garment that is always near me, but never truly touching or restricting me. Amen. So we're going to talk about something today that's along those same lines, not exactly this same topic, but this topic adjacent, as they say. We're going to talk about having no filter, about learning to live as your true, genuine, authentic self, and how in doing that, you actually become impervious to the effects of both flattery and criticism that we just talked about. First, let's say our connection affirmation. I allow perfect health in my body, perfect peace in my mind, perfect unconditional love in my heart, and the perfect divine timing of spirit to guide my life in thought, word, and deed. Okay, I'm going to do something I haven't done in a little bit. I'm going to give you some quotes to begin with today. Quote number 1. When we dare to show our true self and discover that we are loved anyway, then we begin to develop authentic confidence because we realize we are lovable just as we are, instead of for some facade we have created to hide our true self. Kimberly Jones. All right, so this goes back to our devotion. If we become dependent on the praise and on the flattery of others, then we begin to feel obligated to act in a way that pleases them because we're afraid that if we don't, we'll stop getting that praise. So we create this facade or false self in order to keep the flattery coming. Okay, I want to set this next quote up by saying this. We pretty much have all been taught and trained and conditioned, especially women, to believe that our true authentic selves alone are not enough. We've always got to be covering up things about ourselves that we perceive to be imperfections and flaws. We're always having to add something in order to be considered acceptable. On social media now, there are all kinds of filters that can help us out with this, that fix our photos before we're posting them. And it's interesting to me that now people tend to think of that word, filter, that concept, as something that adds something to you, that puts something on top of an image, when in reality, it just means to alter, to change in some way, which would include removing something considered undesirable, which is closer to the classic definition of a filter, which is a porous device for removing impurities or solid particles from a liquid or gas passed through it. Like an air filter on your car or your air conditioning in your house or in a water pitcher. So the literal meaning is to take away things that are impure, but we've come to think filters add something. So we're going to revisit a subject today that we've talked about before, and it's actually a place called the void, where we are given the opportunity to walk away from the facade, the place where we have allowed the place where we can allow everything that is not truly us to drop off, okay, to filter out. The void is a place where we return to our natural state. So in a way, the void itself is a filter. So that was the setup. Now here's the quote. Once we start to work with feminine energy, we begin to see that it is not our minds that are in control of this power. Rather, it ebbs and flows like the movements of the planets, the precession of the seasons, the moon and its tides, our own internal cycles, anniversaries, the events that continually circle around us. All these and more affect our experience and expressions of power. We learn to become aware of these various patterns and their impact on us as we work more consciously with rather than against or in spite of them. We learn that they are all part of the same process. We open toward the energy rather than shut it down. We learn to trust the flow. And that was by Lucy H. Pierce. Okay, so there was quite a bit of substance in that quote. It speaks about feminine energy being circular or cyclical rather than linear and straightforward like masculine energy. And this is a good week to be talking about feminine energy because it's Mother's Day this Sunday. So again, just a quick disclaimer though, feminine energy is not better than or superior to masculine energy. It's just different. And we need both. And we all have both within us, regardless of our gender. But they need to be properly balanced. And this world and the way that it's been working for centuries now has been very masculine energy heavy. So we're going to explore the other side a bit today. This quote talks about learning to work with the seasons and with nature rather than having an attitude of dominance or dominion over, which is a hallmark of the masculine energy, which again, it's needed at some times and in some areas, but we got to pull it back just a little because we've just done it too much. Feminine energy is not about conquests or conquering anything. It's much more about cooperation than competition. In a competition, there must necessarily be a winner and a loser, whereas cooperation creates a win-win scenario. Lastly, this quote contrasts opening to energy and learning to trust the flow of life with shutting that energy down. For instance, if you feel threatened by anything or if you disagree with something, it's the masculine energy that tells you to shut it down or destroy it, or if anything opposes you in any way. There's a lot of that kind of energy floating around in society right now. And as I said, we've been living in a masculine dominant world and culture for a very, very long time. And we'll be talking today about how that consciousness is now in the process of shifting from masculine dominant, not to feminine dominant, because that would be just as bad, but to a balance between the two. As we've said many times, we all have both masculine and feminine energy within us. It's not about gender, but rather it is descriptive of how we approach things. The masculine approach has been dominant for a long time, and in order to find some balance, we're going to have to go into that place that we call the void. I want to begin by reading a piece by Kyle Cease called I Give Up. He says, I've noticed lately that one theme keeps coming up with my clients. People are actually chasing relaxation. Everybody knows it's a stressful time and that we need to relax more, but we seem to be approaching even relaxation in a very masculine, action-oriented way, and that's why it's not working. Time out here. When your parents, when you were little, or if you are parents and you're with your kids and you've paid a lot of money to go on a vacation and you've planned it for a long time and something just doesn't seem to be working out and you want to look at your kids, or your parents ever looked at you and said, have fun, have a good time. It's like they're forcing you to do something that you're not really having a good time doing because they already paid the money. They kind of approach it in that we're going to have a good time whether you like it or not. So that's a very masculine way to approach relaxation. There is a phrase that most of us were taught never to say. I just want to offer to you the possibility that these might be the very words we need to say right now. And that phrase and those words are, I give up. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to stop working. It doesn't mean you're going to stop trying. It means you're going to surrender to what is going on in the world around you. Why? Because it's becoming increasingly impossible to keep up with everything that's going on from our current level of consciousness. I want you to think for a moment, now this is me still reading from Kyle, about how many things you're trying to figure out and deal with right now. Politics, religion, relationships, a changing economy, the threat of war, and an ever widening gap between those who do not think the same as you. It's like you've got all these plates in the air that you're spinning. Now, have anybody seen, you've seen those. I don't think people do it much anymore, but, back in the old days, that was like a trick that people like vaudeville acts would do, where they would have these sticks and they would spin the plates, and see how much they could keep them up. So it says, it's like you've got all these plates in the air that you're spinning and have been spinning maybe for decades, and life is just coming along now and knocking those plates off their sticks one by one. And everybody's busy trying to pick up the pieces and figure out how to glue them back together, put them back on the sticks, and get them spinning again. Everybody's been talking since 2020 of, how are we going to get back to normal? Why do you want to get back to normal? There was a lot wrong with what normal was then. But let me tell you something. You'd be so much happier if you just let them fall and say, I give up. I surrender, because then you can begin to live in alignment with your true self. As long as you're spinning plates and actively trying to keep something, whatever it is, going artificially, that's what's not authentic in your life. And what you're spinning, what you're propping up and keeping alive, is a false identity, not the real you. What you're trying to keep alive is the character you've created for yourself. And at the time you created this character, you did so because you were working with the information you had at the time. You were working with the most and highest you knew at the moment. And for so many of us, we created this character only as an answer to our fear. We wore the costume of this character either to avoid abuse or to receive approval. All right, so time out. Going right back to the devotion from today. We created this character and put on a costume in order to escape other people's criticism or to receive their flattery, because that's what we became dependent on. When you're living as a character and wearing a costume, it may seem for a while as if you have everything under control and that all your plates are spinning nicely. But from that place, you can't see past the illusion of it to a place that is real, or to a place where there is more. Just because the illusion exists that you've gotten your circumstances where you want them, and by that, I mean you're successful at your job, your body looks the way you want it to, your income level is where you want it, you got the relationship that you went after, even if all those things seem to have fallen in place for you. Number one, you're probably having to be in a constant state of plate spinning to keep them in place and where you want them. And number two, this is no indication that you are living in alignment with the highest version of yourself. All right, so that's the end of the piece by Kyle Cease, all of which was very insightful. So what he was saying here is that we're in a time now where all the illusions are being illuminated and all the filters are fading. Basically, our old consciousness is no longer working, and we're realizing that. And the reason is because so many of us are collectively rising to a higher level of consciousness. What might have worked 5 or 10 years ago is no longer effective. Everything is different now because so many of us are on a new and higher level. And no matter how great some of the moments in the old level were, if you get stuck there, it prevents you from moving forward into even better moments. I say this all the time. You can't put new wine in old wineskins, and old ways won't open new doors. However you want to say it, the game is changing. The whole world is shifting. So don't get caught up in comparing your life now to some idealized version of how together you thought you were at some point in the past. However you achieved that state that you were happy with, whatever method you used is invalid now because the time for its effectiveness has expired. It's just the same as keeping expired food in your refrigerator. It's not really nourishing for you anymore and can hurt you if you eat it. And part of that expired, ineffective method and system is this overly masculine approach to the way we function and find solutions to our problems. I listened recently to a woman whose name is Jumana Sophia talk about this shift as it relates to our spiritual practice. And she doesn't specify a particular spiritual practice. She honors them all as we do here. But she's talking about how we approach any spiritual practice that we choose to incorporate into our lives. No matter what the practice may be, there is a masculine way to approach it, and there's a feminine way. She says there's a difference between looking for something and asking to be shown. One is masculine and the other is feminine. This might seem like a subtle difference, but it's actually a big one. One is actively searching, and the other one is sitting back and making the request, show me. Next, she says there is a difference between declaring something and listening first, then allowing whatever guidance you receive from your higher self. The most important part of your spiritual practice, whatever it is not the doing of it, but the sitting back and watching and feeling what results from it. So it's not just checking off items on some spiritual to-do list, like I prayed 5 times today, or I did yoga, or I read my Bible for X amount of minutes, or I went to church, etc. The more important thing to focus on is, what did I get out of that? What did it bring up in me that I can now use to better myself? Your own personal agenda must step far enough back from your practice to bloom and grow whatever it is that it was meant to bloom and grow. It's like pouring fertilizer on the soil. The desired result or outcome is not the action of the fertilizing itself, but rather how the fertilizer affects the soil, what it produces in the soil, how it changes it. Approaching any spiritual practice from the feminine perspective always requires you to stop reaching outward and turn it completely around to reach inside yourself. The purpose of any practice is to bring you back to yourself. And I would add to what she's saying here, your true, authentic self, not the character you've created. In other words, it's not that our practice necessarily needs to change, but just the part of it that we emphasize. What she's saying here is we've been placing more emphasis on this masculine approach to spirituality than we have on the feminine. We've become more about doing than being. Our level of being receptive, which is feminine, has not matched our level of being active, which is masculine. And again, we don't need to go all the way the other way. We just need to kind of bring it into the middle to balance. And she believes, as I do, that right now a greater emphasis is needed on the feminine approach because that's what's been lacking. But it's hard to let go, she says, of what we know, especially if we have had some degree of success with the ways in which we've done things in the past. All right, so it's just like Kyle Cease was saying in the piece I read earlier. Even the greatest moments in our past must be left in the past before we can move forward or evolve any higher. And that's also a part of this feminine energy. Masculine energy is linear. It's either up, 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 or it's forward, 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 ahead. But feminine energy, because it honors cycles, understands the concept of the beginner's mind. It understands that after reaching the pinnacle of your middle school level, you must begin all the way over at 0 again when you enter into high school. It's the same with spiritual levels. They don't just continue to go up, up, and up. At the end of each cycle of growth, you must begin again at the novice level. I want to read now something from Amanda Ellis about cycles and seasons in this same context, but it was obviously written during a different time of the year. She says, "Where I live, the leaves are falling from the trees and the season is changing from summer to autumn. It's a time for releasing and reminds me that there is a season for everything in our lives. As much as we may want to cling to the old, change is an inevitable part of our path. I just took my daughter into town. She was going off to celebrate a friend's birthday, and as I watched the young woman she now is walk away from the car, I remembered the child she used to be. One piece of advice that was given to me when I worried about how I would manage the teenage years and beyond is that the trick is to grow with them, to look forward to each new stage rather than hanker for what was. To adapt to any stage of parenthood, you have to move with them. As they grow and evolve, so must you. Parenthood is a great metaphor for many things because it gives us the opportunity to learn to respond to a number of different scenarios based on current timelines and life stages, not past ones. We often try to cling to what is gone because it is what we know best, even if something better and more expansive is right in front of us. However, even if what is in front of us is hard and challenges us, we should take nature as our role model, for she knows that spring always follows winter's harsh cold. Nature knows there is a time for everything, just like the Old Testament describes. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. The words of that passage are much needed now in our world, both collectively and personally. The trick is to know which time slot you're in, and then, once acknowledged, feel it to the fullest. The trick is to not run away from a period of mourning following a loss. It has to be experienced, nor to rush too quickly through a celebration. The one constant in this world is change. Remember, life will always move on, but each part of our story needs witnessing and feeling. So, again, that's the feminine energy, witnessing and feeling, not always rushing through strong emotions or avoiding them altogether, which is kind of the masculine way to approach things. And the reason that's especially important right now is because we are all collectively in need of healing at the moment before we shift into this new level of consciousness, before that shift can be complete. We're at the end of it's always at the end of a cycle that all the hurt that's been accumulated during it comes up to be healed. All right, so here's something else from Amanda about that. She says, when an illness occurs, when we are sick, it's an indication that something needs to be healed. But all too often, the way we approach sickness is like a matador in a bullfight. We go to war with it. We say, bring it on. That is a very masculine approach to dealing with sickness, fighting it. We talk about people battling this disease or that. And instead of being concerned with what it has come to teach us or what the deeper issue it is signaling, we are more concerned with not seeming to be weak or in a position where we would have to give up our perceived control. Our culture tends to admire people who push through their illness and keep working, which is basically the same thing as ignoring it. She continues, when you go to war with an illness, there is the absence of that softer, feminine energy that is often necessary to bring about healing. Think about this. For instance, when someone injures themselves, you'll often hear people say to their spouse or another caretaker, just give them some TLC, which stands for tender, loving care. What about the words tender, loving, and care are warlike? Nothing. In fact, it's the absolute opposite. Many of us are not good at accepting the lessons illness comes to teach us. Many of us are also not good at being. We're only good at doing. Fighting illness and disease has worked up to a point, but a new consciousness is now trying to come in. A consciousness where you can't fight it right, you can only love it right. This new consciousness cannot be won by fighting for it. It must be received, and receptiveness is a feminine quality. All right, so this new consciousness that she's talking about here is going to require a different approach from what we've become accustomed to. And if the whole COVID experience over the last few years has taught us anything, I think it has taught us that we're going to have to figure out a different way to deal with illness. I want to end today by reading a piece by Andrew Martin called Postcards from the Void, which revisits this concept of the void that we've talked about before. He says, the void is the place the space, the field, the plateau, the plain, where there is nothing but pure potential. And in this space, anything that is built on illusion, anything that is untrue, anything that is not the essential you cannot survive, because that's the purpose of the void, to take you back to that place where you are pure potential. The void is darkness and chaos in the best possible sense, because nothing is already seen or formed, so you can expect anything with no limitations whatsoever. It is literally the place where all things are possible. The void is the place where we go, where we finally get around to doing the work we agreed to come here and do in this lifetime. And what I'm realizing is it takes as long as it takes for us to find ourselves. In the void, you are stripped of all that you are not. As I said earlier, it's the ultimate filter in its original sense, okay? Which is necessary before you make that next loop on the spiral upward. What you come face to face with in the void is everything that came with the package of humanness that you chose to deal with when you became a human incarnation. Your ego, your beliefs, your emotions, your physical body. All of that must be dealt with inside the void before you can transcend and move on toward the realization of your higher self. It's what Jesus faced in the wilderness and then again in the Garden of Gethsemane. There he describes, then Andrew describes this process, which I'll paraphrase. He says, your higher self, or your Christ consciousness, is descending downward in frequency because it's coming from that eternal place of oneness. At the same time, your humanity, your human self, is ascending upward from the realm of duality. And the key is for those two frequencies to meet in the middle. That middle place is where these two meet is the foundation of your personal sovereignty. And it's the place where the higher self shows you what it is to live in total love, which is the same thing as total truth. And anything that is below that level in your life is no longer acceptable. And until you free yourself from it and leave it behind, you will just have to continue to sit with it in the void. Because leaving everything that's below the level of unconditional love is what is required to stand on that level, that foundation of personal sovereignty, and from there move higher. So that's the new consciousness that we're shifting into. Now, here's where the feminine versus the masculine approach comes in. He says it's not about going out and work and looking for the unhealed parts of yourself. It's about sitting and receiving messages from and facing all that is within you that still seeks an audience. And once you have reached this foundational level based on unconditional love and non-judgment, you can give it an audience from that place of personal sovereignty where you are sitting on the throne, as it were, of your own life, as the master creator of your own life. So what he's saying here is when you do this, when you sit in the void and you face yourself, or when you allow your higher self to show your lower self all the parts of you that are still in need of healing, that's what happens. All those things start coming up. And as he says, they seek an audience, just like you would go seek an audience with a king, with your higher self, because those are the parts of you that feel unseen and unheard. And until you reach the level where you can see and hear them from a place of non-judgment and unconditional love for yourself, then you just have to remain in the void. That's why he said it's just going to take as long as it takes. It's up to you how long you stay there. He continues, are you ready to let go of all you have been in the past that no longer serves you? When asked, everybody says that they are. Yet when confronted with our true selves in the void, so many of us run back out and shut the door. The only way we get anything for ourselves is to claim it for ourselves. So, there's something else that we learn in the void. You've got to be willing to do for yourself what you've been expecting everyone else to do for you. You've got to be willing to love yourself the way you want everyone else to love you. You've got to be willing to listen to yourself, your higher self, that is, during those times when you're so upset because you feel like no one is listening to you and no one understands how you feel. So once more, back to the devotion today. You've got to learn to be your own flatterer or encourager. And you've also got to learn to be your own critic. If you judge yourself first, and when I say the word judge here, I'm not talking about in a negative sense. I'm talking about an objective assessment of with your own discernment. Then you won't need to be judged by others because you've already done it yourself. And then when that happens, when others do criticize or judge you, it doesn't really touch you because you've already cleared out everything that needs to be cleared out. You've already looked at all the ugly stuff and said, I don't want to do this anymore. And so once you get okay with yourself, whatever somebody else says to you is meaningless because you're good with you. Okay, back to Andrew. How can we possibly expect those things from others, love, encouragement, respect, really listening, until we are willing to give them to ourselves? How can others ever truly know us until we truly know ourselves? If you require honesty and integrity from others, you must first require it of yourself, about yourself. Wow, that's deep. But that's the place we all have to get before we can make that shift into higher consciousness. We have to drop the character we've created and take off the mask we've been hiding behind. Finally, he says this, so daily we must go to the void and sit with the truth of what we are and of where we are, regardless of where that is in relationship to our higher self. This process is the quintessential example of beginning right where you are. You get quiet and you find that space of silence, of stillness, and of being. Your true essence is who you meet in the void, along with everything you are carrying within you that is not your true essence. The void is the place where you begin to see the difference between the two. Everything that stands in the way of you being your true essence and nothing but your true essence will come screaming into that space to be looked at and heard and loved and healed. This is the place where you are able to witness firsthand everything that is incongruent with your higher self. And most of it, you will find, is based on some form of not enoughness. All those parts of you that have been unseen, unheard, and unloved are beautifully highlighted for you in the void so that you may see them, hear them, and love them. All thoughts of not enough are never based in your true essence and higher self because that is always enough. The void is not about doing anything. It's not about going there in order to fix your stuff. It's about sitting with and truly seeing all that you are and not judging any of your experiences in the least. It's about looking on them with love, compassion, and open arms. So it's not about anything you put on or add to yourself, anything you superimpose on top of the picture of yourself that you've created. That's the false you. It's what you take away, beginning with self-judgment or self-loathing, self-hate. You take away self-doubt, jealousy, envy, intolerance, fear, all of your excuses, and you just let all of that drop away in the void. Then that's the time you can activate that masculine energy to get up and walk out. That's when it's time to do, but you got to be first. The essence of the void experience is the fact that there are no longer any crutches. There aren't any props. There aren't any stories. There aren't any pretty filters to hide behind. The void is just you, all of you. And if you're not ready to look that in the face, then don't go there. We are all being called to a whole new realm of work now on a whole new level that looks and feels nothing like anything we've done before or anywhere we've been before. It's a new cycle. This will require us to be the beginner again and go back to the place where we know nothing, or as we talk about here all the time, that place of I don't know. We must leap into the void, into the unknown, leaving all we have known and learned up to this point behind, trusting that whatever we need will be there when we arrive. The void calls us to sit in the fullness of all that we are, anchored in the truth that we are that eternal self, that eternal being. We are the master creator of our own reality. We are the same energy that made the sun, the moon, the stars. To sit in that knowing while being surrounded by a hurricane of not knowing and the uncertainty of chaos and confusion, and still be able to hold that knowing even in the midst of the storm, not letting it affect us for a moment, is what sitting in the void will produce. Absolute personal sovereignty, knowing that all is well and that we are exactly where we agreed to be. So, will you be brave enough to leave your filter behind and sit in the void for as long as it takes to meet your true self and find your personal sovereignty, to find a place of unconditional love, acceptance, and non-judgment for all that is, most of all and most especially for yourself? It's not always easy, but it is always worth it, and it is necessary to shift into that new, higher level of consciousness. So, I want to tell you one last story. Yesterday, I was listening to a podcast, and I don't even remember who it was, but it was two gentlemen talking. And one gentleman was talking about this story about Martin Luther King Jr. that I had never heard before. And I really don't know whether or not it's true. I didn't have any opportunity to independently corroborate it, but I hope that it's true because it's a great story. And I know that it has been true of other people I have known. But what he said was that speech Martin Luther King Jr. gave, I Have a Dream, he had written it out as he did. He was a very prepared man. He always went into his sermons prepared. He wrote a lot. But this man was saying that he had heard a story that when Martin Luther King Jr. Uttered that phrase, I have a dream, that the Spirit so filled him, he left his notes entirely, and the rest of that entire speech was just ad lib. It was not what was written on his paper. And when I heard that, I'm getting chills even now hearing it, because it turned out to be the speech that he's most remembered for, because he was not afraid to drop what he had so carefully created and go into the unknown and let his true, authentic self speak with no filter. And look what impact that speech has had on all of humanity, and what we would have missed if he had not been willing to do that. Our created false selves can never touch others or influence the world like that. And for that, we have to drop our filters, and we have to let our true selves speak and shine through. Amen? Amen. Let's stand and sing our song, our ending song. Okay, my mom wants to say something.
I want to add a little bit to that story. She doesn't get credit for this often, but this is true. It is facts. The night before I Have a Dream speech, Martin Luther King had talked either publicly or to Mahalia Jackson about having a dream. He said, I have this dream in my soul, and my dream is this and that and the other. So he's doing his speech, like she said, that was written in what he had prepared. And Mahalia screamed out, Martin, tell him about your dream. So she doesn't get credit for that very much, but I'm giving her credit today.
Okay. Amen. And that's a good point too, that sometimes that's why we need each other. Because sometimes we're afraid to step out and be our true selves. And that friend has to say, do it, tell him, has to encourage you. And that's the good kind of flattering. All right, let's see. Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Be at peace. Have a great week. I love you.